Hey guys, Philosophossum. So I finally got done giving that one Steve Jobs video the thorough debunking it needed, and now that that's off my plate, I'm ready to move on to the next video.
Here are 5 more stupid things about one of the topics that was tied for first place in that poll: libertarianism.
Son of a bitch.
It fetishizes the free market. Most libertarians, those of the Ayn Rand, Ron Paul variety anyway.
Those are the only libertarians you can think of? You're not going to mention John Locke, Immanuel Kant, Lysander Spooner, Robert Nozick, Murray Rothbard. Shows how much you know about what you're criticizing.
Speak of the free market as though it's the ideal solution to every problem.
Well, by definition, it kind of is. The free market is designed on a mechanical level to achieve maximum results at minimum expense.
Just get government out of the way.
Government, on the other hand, because they can just take the funding that they need, has very little, if any, incentive to address people's needs, and absolutely zero incentive to be efficient about it.
And let the power of the free market create jobs.
Well, yes, there are in general more opportunities in an economy where people are free to seek out a living uninhibited.
Or end discrimination.
Well, if you're not serving a certain group of people, you're also not making money off that certain group of people. It's kind of simple, really.
Or realize whatever else you want to happen.
Well, let's think about it for a moment. If a firm wants to make money, what do they need to do? Make their income as high as possible and their expenses as low as possible. In order to do the former, they need to have the highest quality service possible, and to do the latter, they need to do it as efficiently as possible. Thus, you're encouraged not only to provide a high-quality service to the public, but also do so efficiently. This is why the free market tends to have a better track record at solving society's problems than other systems.
I have 2 problems with this. First, it encourages people to view everything in primarily economic terms. Ideas, healthcare, people, everything is a commodity to be bought and sold.
That's because that's how reality works. You cannot consume more resources than exist. No amount of emotions or feigned concern for the less fortunate will change that.
And second, it assumes that absent government interference and oversight, that people will just sort of naturally act in the most rational and beneficial ways, and things will sort themselves out.
Actually, we make no such assumption. We fully recognize that people aren't perfect, and that not everyone's going to make the best decisions in the free market. What we argue is that a system where individuals are free to make choices of their own volition has a typically higher success rate than those that are heavily controlled and regulated by government. Now let me ask you this. You seem to be making the assumption that certain people, i.e. government, will naturally act beneficial and rational absent any sort of market incentive to perform well, given that you do advocate for mandatory taxation. Aren't you making similar good-natured assumptions about the people in government? After all, if we can't trust people to make good decisions for themselves, why should we be any more confident that they'll make good decisions for everybody else?
An assumption of which both common sense and the entirety of human history should make us very dubious.
Actually, countries with freer economies, that is, less taxes and regulations, typically perform better in almost every metric. GDP, average household income, income inequality, which is something lefties constantly bitch about.
It misrepresents how government works.
51% of the population gets to decide who it is that will fuck up the least. Yeah, that basically sums it up.
Libertarians often equate taxation with theft, complaining that the government operates by robbing people at gunpoint of their hard-earned money. I often hear this complaint coming from students who have never even had to pay taxes. I guess they're just really not looking forward to it.
Or, most likely the case, they're partaking in some form of private education, which is not run by and therefore heavily biased in favor of government.
Anyway, it is a demented distortion to compare a democratically elected representative government collecting taxes for the funding of public services which make life better for everybody.
The classification of theft is relevant insofar as how the funding is obtained, not how it's used. Theft is by definition taking someone else's property without their consent. If the thief uses that money for drugs or to help the poor, so long as it was taken from you against your will, it's theft. You can argue that because tax money is used for public services that everyone benefits from, it's a form of justified theft, but unless I can opt out, it's theft.
To a mugger poking you in the ribs with a .38 and demanding your wallet.
Well, according to your logic, all the mugger needs in order for this to be justified is for 51% of the victim's neighbors to agree to it.
I find it interesting how over-the-top libertarianism inspires its adherents to go to protest what they see as government tyranny, while it minimizes or ignores non-governmental forms of tyranny.
That's because government tyranny is usually what enables these non-government forms of tyranny. Your precious regulations you clamor on about, they're usually crafted with the intent that operating costs be increased for the competition, thus artificially kicking smaller businesses out of the market.
If government is evil because it limits our freedom, how much more evil are those who seek to exploit the economic and cultural conditions that deprive people of their freedom and leave them trapped by poverty and disenfranchisement?
Yep, minimum wage and licensing laws. Things your precious government does.
How dare anyone rend his garment and beat his breast over an oppressive government while working to advance the interests of corporations over those of the people whose labor those corporations seek to exploit for the cheapest possible price?
Yes, your employer seeks to exploit your labor for the cheapest possible price. But guess what? The employee also seeks to exploit their employer for the highest possible price. These two opposing interests are what create the equilibrium price for that particular type of labor. This not only creates the optimal wages for that position, but also the optimal number of jobs. But let's have things your way and force employers to pay employees above what the market price is. Have fun being replaced with a robot.
See, libertarians have got it backwards. We don't need laws to take our freedoms away. We need laws to protect our freedoms.
Well, I do agree with you on that. We do need some laws to protect our freedoms from people who would take them away, or who would interfere with our rights. The thing is, libertarians don't actually want to get rid of all laws. Heck, even anarchists don't want that. What we want is a more comprehensive and fair system of law, easy to understand, based on logic, stuff like the non-aggression principle. There is a bit of a difficult balance between what freedoms you restrict in order to protect what freedoms, but you're much more likely to strike that balance with a system of law that's fair and objective, based on logic, rather than the subjective whim of a politician.
To guard them from those who would rob us of our liberty for their own profit.
In a libertarian society, the only way to make profit is from providing goods or services that other people need or want. The only institution that can really profit from the loss of others' freedoms is government.
Profiteers who, incidentally, are often held up by libertarians as heroes.
That's because these profiteers have provided the public with some sort of good or service that increased the quality of our lives. In the process of doing so, provided jobs and opportunities to people, and accomplished all of this without relying on violence or coercion, at least in most circumstances. Well, let's take a look at this picture real quick. The guy on the left heavily curtailed civil liberties, in addition to waging a bloody civil war, all because certain people just wanted to opt out of his government. The guy on the right provided quality services that increased the quality of living for the public and provided jobs and opportunities to people. So yeah, I'd say that picture is actually pretty accurate.
It favors dogma over empirical data. The most popular form of economics in libertarian circles is the Austrian school. You may have heard Ron Paul mention it every time he's ever opened his goddamn mouth. Here's the funny thing. The Austrian school isn't based on statistics or history or data of any kind. Ludwig von Mises himself writes in his book Human Action that the principles of the Austrian school are not derived from and can neither be verified nor falsified by empirical experience, or as it's also known, reality. In other words, the entire school of economics is just some shit that libertarians made up to rationalize their raging hard-on for amoral, unfettered free enterprise.
Yeah, that's not actually what the Austrian School of Economics believes. Mises never said that economic principles can't be verified empirically at all. Rather, he said that economic principles cannot be verified empirically the same way that natural sciences can. He was offering this as a criticism toward non-subjective theories of value, such as the labor theory of value. The problem with a lot of collectivist or heavily centralized economic theories is that they treat economics as a hard natural science like physics or chemistry, trying to create formulas that could 100% accurately predict the outcome of any economic system. The problem is economies are a human-based system. The factors that come into play when individuals make decisions are so varied that there's no way to really treat it as a hard empirical science. That's the point that Mises and other Austrian economics proponents argue.
It's a vain fantasy. Libertarians insist their way is the best way, perhaps the only way, to achieve a truly free and prosperous society. But if that's true, if their philosophy is so self-evidently superior, how is it that today not a single country chooses to govern itself in this way? Why is it that no nation on the face of the earth chooses to arrange its economy according to the precepts of the Austrian school?
And that's where you're wrong, Mr. Shives. There are several countries that do embrace libertarian principles. The one that immediately comes to my mind is Hong Kong. They're currently one of the wealthiest countries on the planet in spite of having barren soil and no natural resources. This is because low taxes and regulation create the type of environment where businesses tend to succeed. In fact, the Heritage Foundation actually compiles data about different countries, how free their economy is, what the tax burden and regulations are like there, and compares it with how successful that country is economically, their GDP, average household income. And what we find consistently is that the more free a country is economically, generally the better off they are. I'll leave a link to the Heritage Foundation's website in the description so you can verify what I'm saying.
And why do occasional attempts to found libertarian communities, even on very small scales, inevitably end in chaos and failure? When they bother to answer these questions rather than ignore or deflect, libertarians will usually blame sinister forces like big government or socialism for the rejection of their ideals. But I think the answer is a much simpler one. It's that libertarianism doesn't work.
Well, half the time we don't even get to try. That's one of the major issues with the current political paradigm. You're forced to participate in whatever system is the norm, regardless of whether you like it or not. So if there's another political system I think would work better, I'm more or less not able to try it. Even if I could try it small scale, I'd still, be harassed by the taxman and the regulators. Because there's no way to fully opt out of the current political system, there's no way to fully try any other system. That's why you can't really say for sure whether or not any given alternative would work. And that's, at the end of the day, mostly what we're asking for is a choice. We're not saying that people who like the current system have to abandon it along with us. We just want to be able to opt out and try something else. You like the current system, you like government, knock yourself out. Just don't force me to participate.
And it doesn't work because it fails to realize that individual liberty and society require each other.
Well, individual liberty is something you're born with and have naturally, and yes, society does require each other, but it doesn't require a state
to have meaning, and that both are about more than people simply being allowed to spend their money however they want.
Well, if people aren't allowed to spend their money however they want, what's the alternative? Someone else telling them how to spend it. And what do you have in mind for that? Do you have suggestions, advice? Is this voluntary? Or are they going to force me to spend the money how they think they should? This is the problem with authoritarianism. A lot of them seem to forget that what they advocate for is backed up by violence. This is why it's fundamentally counter to other concepts that they say they believe in, like individual liberty and society. I mean, what could be more antisocial than I think total strangers should be forced at gunpoint to spend their money how I think they should?
The hardest part is only picking 5.
Actually, the hardest part is doing research to figure out what it is libertarians believe and why. That's clearly why you never bothered. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.